Hey everyone, I'm Pranav and you're listening to the Marketing Scientists podcast. Here we interview marketing operators and learn how to apply the scientific method to the field of marketing, all with the goal of unlocking sustainable growth. Today's guest was Seth Matlins, the managing director of the Forbes CMO Network, a board member of the American Advertising Federation, and a former executive at companies like Endeavor, LiveNation, and CAA. Here are three things that I learned from Seth in this conversation. Don't use celebrity or influence in media just for the sake of it. We talked about all the ads from the Super Bowl this year. How the CMO needs to become the CEO of the function and what that means. And I kid you not, I heard the best definition of marketing I have heard. So let's get straight into it. Okay, so let's jump straight in, Seth. The Super Bowl just went by, and we were all probably glued in. I think it was the most watched Super Bowl ever. And I know you had talked about this on your LinkedIn, that you were a little bit nervous about what's going to come out from an advertising perspective. So tell me, now that you've sort of been there and seen all the advertising, who do you think won from a media perspective? Who did it right? And, what's your take?
Well, I don't know that I would say I was nervous. The words I used were I have anticipatory disappointment. And I think it played out pretty well. I was by and large disappointed. So now let me say why. What disappointed me? I think yet again, too many, not everyone, but too many treated celebrity as a strategy. And by the way, celebrity is an excellent media strategy. They're not an excellent creative strategy. Too many use them in place of and in lieu of an idea. Too few actually had what I thought was a product or service or brand relevant idea inside them. Too few solved any problems or created any interest. Too few in my opinion, resonated on an emotional level. And too often we find ourselves talking about the creative in the context of who was in it, not the brand that it was supposed to be promoting. Who won it? I don't know. To me, the win comes from did it drive commerce, and does it drive commerce over time? These are top of the funnel pieces of creative. So it's which, by the way, could be a missed opportunity, right? One of the most trafficked pieces was 2 years ago when Droga 5 created that Coinbase ad with the QR code in it. They don't need to be that, but a lot of and a lot of marketers use the 2 weeks in front of, and as you know, the week after to amortize, these massive investments. I don't know. There was some good work, by the way. There was some good work. I thought Etsy's work was terrific, right? No celebrity introduced a service that solved a problem and explained it all very clearly. I thought the DoorDash work was super interesting and, quite candidly, a much better take than Uber Eats on how to open the aperture on what they deliver. I thought that the Kawasaki ad, cognizant that I wasn't the target, but equally aware that I wanted one of those after I saw the ad, was pretty good. Again, celebrity and talent free. So there were some. I didn't see all of them because sometimes I too go to the bathroom. Don't tell. But yeah.
No, that's a great summary, and I love how you talked about the how to use celebrity in telling a story that is about sort of adding value to the customer and solving a real problem rather than just for the sake of celebrity. And I think this is very true for influencer as well, right? It's just a different scale, whether you're talking about sort of a celebrity influencer or a micro influencer, but it's the same exact concept. Awesome. So, you are probably the most connected person I know in the CMO community by the virtue of your role as, the MD of the Forbes CMO Network. And you talk to a wide variety of CMOs all the time, day to day. What do you think are the top 3 skills that CMOs need to possess in 2024? And do you see these like as evergreen things, or do you think, there are things that are happening right now in the industry that everyone needs to pick up on?
Well, I think it's important to start with the fact that there's no such thing as a singular view of the CMO, right? There are multiple types of CMOs and multiple types of businesses practicing the art and science of marketing in different ways for different, to different ends. I think that today, that said, right, with that as caveat, to answer your question, you've got to be you got to be focused on who your audience is and why they will buy. People buy because we provide incentives, right? That's it. You have to know what incentives will be most motivating, compelling, attitude and behavior inducing to them. That cuts across everything. And I think that too is a thread that so many marketers have lost in and amongst massive, unprecedented change. The CMO is unheralded and in my opinion has the single hardest job in business today, bar none. That's not to say the CEO's job is easy, but the CMO typically reports to the CEO. The CEO doesn't report to the CMO. But we have too often confused the how and where we'll reach them with what we'll do when we reach them. We've traded personalization for relevancy, data for insight. We've sometimes given up on insight altogether, right? But it's really quite trite to say, yes, you have to be customer obsessed, but not so much customer obsessed as customer aware and insightful. You gotta, Antonio Lucio, one of the legends of the CMO field, said to me about a year ago that today's CMO needs to be the CEO of the function. It is absolutely impossible for anyone to have expertise in and amongst the explosion of tactical options. So you got to be the CEO of the function. And the single most important thing, I'll just give you three. So customer obsession, I almost am embarrassed to say it, CEO of the function. But you got to know your job is to drive growth, that your job is in fact marketing objectives or a business strategy. And a CMO understands that. Not every CMO understands that. Not every marketer understands that. And in my opinion, there is no excuse for not understanding that.
It's very well said. I've been using a line with customers and prospects. They're investor first, marketer second, and it all goes back to that last point about business strategy and driving growth. Because if you're not driving growth and net new business, how does anything else matter, right?
You're absolutely right. But if your work isn't intended to drive growth, because in the absolute of your statement is one of the challenges the CMO faces, which is today's CEO and CFOs are expert in the black and white of numbers, but not in the 50 shades of gray that color human attitudes and behaviors. So I think what I would point to is there's a difference between missing the mark and missing the point. Missing the point is inexcusable. Missing the mark is inevitable. Right. And so not everything is going to drive growth. Not everything is going to work any more, to use your word, than we expect every one of our investments to make us money as opposed to becoming a tax deduction.
So good. And the way that I sort of think about that, and I've kind of looked at this idea of experimentation at large companies. So you look at a Microsoft, an Amazon, an Uber, an Airbnb, a Booking.com. And there's actual literature now that shows that 70 to 80% of the experiments that they run fail. That is the cost of being in a high scale, high growth business.
It's also the cost of being it's the cost of doing business today. And I hadn't heard that data, that percentage, but that's exactly why we started the Entrepreneurial CMO 50 list. This will be its third year when it publishes in April, for exactly that reason, which is to destigmatize things not working, to facilitate the kind of psychological permission for this brilliant community of marketers globally to know that risk is imperative. Failure isn't failure if you learn from it. Experimentation and optimization are key in a world where the status quo, it's not that it is irrelevant, it's that you have to give real strategic rigor and interrogation to determine if it is, why it is or isn't, and then move forward from there.
I agree 100%. And one of the key sort of tactical pieces that we talk to our customers about is have an experimentation budget. And you have to have that budget as part of your planning process, because without that, you're basically saying, I know in advance exactly what every single dollar is going to do. And that's just a sign of hubris or foolishness, whichever way you look at it, right? That's not how the
Certainly
real world works.
naivete. And there's the, I referred to this one CMO, and to your point all the time, Chris Davis, who's the CMO and head of SVP of merchandising at New Balance, which has just been killing it. He allocates his marketing budget as 50% tried and true, 30% works in other categories, and we're going to bring it into our category and see how it does. 20% high risk of failure, but that high risk of failure is strategically driven, and it's not capricious or superficial. And then that 20 washes the 30, washes the 50, the 30, etc. And that's how he's been driving the growth that he has.
He's doing it right. I love that. And my co-founder's choice of shoe brand is New Balance, and we were having that discussion of like, why New Balance? And he was telling me it's just that's what I've been wearing for 20 years, and I love it. And I'm like, great, that's awesome, amazing. Well, on that note, right, we've had this explosion of conversation around performance marketing, brand marketing, growth marketing, customer marketing, loyalty marketing. Like there's a new term that gets, influencer marketing. There's a new term that gets born every year just as part of fashion. And I'm curious to hear your take. Is that beneficial or is it hurtful to the industry? And yeah, what's your take on these labels?
It couldn't be more self-destructive. We have, I mentioned before that we've become so obsessed with tactics that we lose sight of what we are doing and why we're doing and why somebody will or won't buy. And our obsession with tactics is expressed in the increasing specificity and expertise of those prefixes. And we spend a lot of time thinking about the prefixes and none thinking about the suffix, which is marketing. It's all just effing marketing. It either works or it doesn't. It is all intended to drive attitudes and influence behaviors. That's what it does. All ingredients, different companies, different brands, different businesses, and different life stages will use a different mix of those ingredients to make their souffle. Sorry, I don't know why. But a metaphor that I use not infrequently to kind of apply this premise or make this point from a different industry is it's a lot like modern medicine, which has become so specialized that there's nobody who's treating the human, the patient. They're treating the disease, the condition, the circumstance, right? So, yeah, I got a knee problem, but that knee's, I will butcher the metaphor, but that's what's happening. So I will not continue with it. We're focused on the prefixes, not the suffix. It's all just marketing, and your job as a chief marketer, right? Or anybody in the organization is to determine what's going to be most efficient and most effective, because nothing's efficient, no matter how little you spend, if it's not effective within that portfolio of opportunity.
Couldn't have said it better, right? Effectiveness before efficiency always. But, it also presents a challenge though, right? Because now you have sort of new formats, new tactics. Everyone's kind of coming up with, okay, I need to get on that trend or I need to get onto that trend. And that's why this job is so hard, because and you get this like divergence of different specialties. What's your thought on how do you stay on top of that as a CMO or a VP of marketing, given that you still have to do those tactics on a daily basis?
So it's not the explosion of tactics that matters as much as the change in consumer, customer, human behaviors. Right? The consumption of media, the fragmentation of attention, the proliferation of good enough products and services, right? So that's where the challenge begins. And then you got to figure out what you can use or not use. But if you are chasing trend, you're more often than not, in my experience, chasing fad. And that's a terrible use of time and human and capital resource. And so you do, in no way do I mean to diminish or suggest that you don't need that specificity of expertise. You do. But at the CMO level, you need to be in my opinion, you need to be a T-shaped business executive who has a vertical expertise in marketing. And within that vertical expertise in marketing, you better be damn sure that you have a working knowledge, right, of the big buckets and an expertise wherever your career has led you. But the bifurcation of brand and performance, which has been driven unintentionally in its origin by the Googles and the Facebooks before it was Meta of the world, who were just selling digital advertising at a cost per click basis, so they called it performance. Suddenly it's as if we've forgotten that the single greatest performance engine in the history of the world is brand, right? And that you cannot capture demand at the bottom of the funnel in that last click of attribution unless you've created demand somewhere else, with the caveat being that I did recently buy a t-shirt from a company I've never heard of, because it's served it up and I like the design.
There you go. On that point about brand and performance, there's another sort of conversation around this trust or the lack thereof between CMOs and their peers in the executive setting in the boardroom. And the real question that I have for you is, what does a healthy relationship look like from your vantage point? Who do you think is doing it right? If you had to kind of share a role model of like, okay, look at that company, they're doing it really right. If any names come to mind, or if you've had these types of conversations, yeah.
I think that the trust in the C-suite is like trust in any human relationship, because it's a series of human relationships, right? I think it is complicated in this instance because most CEOs and CFOs have zero marketing background. Very few have any. And that's more on the chief executive side than the CFO side. And so just thinking about them, which makes them bad or certainly suboptimal stewards of marketing investments, supporters of their CMO, supporters of what she is trying to do for the business. They don't know what to expect and what not to expect, and on what timeline to expect it. And they are themselves so pressured, in particular for publicly traded companies, to deliver predictable guidance and result, that the fact of the matter is marketing is art and science. And if the data were perfect, there would be much better marketing than there is, but the data is imperfect and it only measures yesterday, and at its best provides some sneaking suspicion of what tomorrow could be. And I think that's where the relationship falls down, because a relationship that has no common ground is a harder relationship to sustain.
Yeah, and the way I think about sort of the marketer's role, the CMO's role at the executive level, at the board level, is to really sort of inspire what the future could look like that is grounded in what you were calling customer insights, right? And what I would say, if I were to be in a CMO sort of seat, talk to customers more than anybody else in the company. And if you can do that as a marketing team or as a CMO, is spend time with customers to really understand what drives their behavior and represent that at the executive level. Now, with all of the other measurement and statistics and forecasting, that I think that helps to increase that trust factor with everybody else.
I would say certainly there's a difference between customer and consumer, and there are some truths about the human brain that are the same today as they were 4,000 years ago. And we are primed to survive, and then we deal with thriving. And there are some universal truths and wisdoms. And then the time with customer or consumer is to find the insight that can really bring a product to life, a service to life, another way to sell in that births the ideas that are necessary to continuing to grow a brand on a sustainable and profitable basis.
I love that. And, you know, I know we are a measurement company ourselves, but I tell everybody no amount of measurement is going to solve your growth problems if you don't have great ideas. So it all comes back to that.
To that point, it's there isn't enough conversation about what we measure and what we do with what we get from measuring it. I was sitting with a CMO earlier today of a global brand who is about in the fashion and apparel space, who's about to open a 70,000 square foot showcase retail location somewhere in the world. And they were telling me that as they ran the financial modeling on the showcase, the store, it's a disaster, right? Like 70,000 square feet. They're not going to make money back on it. And I said to them, I was like, you're not going to make money back directly, but you're not doing it. You didn't take 70,000 feet to optimize PSF throughput, right? To optimize dollars per square foot. You took it to address the top of the funnel. You place this in a location that is brand accretive. And so the investment and the measurement has to go beyond what the cash register is going to ring over the course of a year. And we stop short of measuring what matters most too often.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Like how you think about the short term and the long term, and especially when you come to these type of investments, right? If it's a great example, like even if you think about a factory, right? You put a factory in place, and that's going to give you, you know, returns over the next 10 years. It's not something that's going to impact your, you know, your sales and your throughput for the next quarter. And people forget that that's not just true for your physical sort of assets that, you know, in your manufacturing line, but that applies across your entire business. There are things that are going to pay off in a much, you know, longer time frame.
Well, there's that great book. I think it's Les Benet's book. I don't know who wrote it, maybe Byron. The long and short of it.
The long and short. Yep,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. That's something that I recommend everybody read. And the other one that is making the rounds right now, or resurgence, is this book called How Brands Grow. I don't know if you've read that from
Well,
Byron
yes,
Sharp.
there's volume 1 and volume 2, and then by Byron Sharp and Jenny Romaniuk, I think I'm pronouncing her name right, also wrote
That's right.
this book kind of as a spin out. But yeah, those are classics and they endure. And there's a fourth book I'll recommend, which is Morgan Housel's new book. I believe it's called What Stays the Same, about enduring truths and enduring behaviors.
Love it. That's a good one. His books are on my to read list, but the last couple of years have been really busy with building this business. I haven't been doing much reading. I got to get back to it. All right, one last question for you, Seth, before I let you go. So, you know, there's a lot of debate about sort of all of these, you know, tactics and marketing. If you had to pick, and you wrote a post about this, if you had to pick a definition of what is marketing, what would you say? What's the best summary of what is marketing?
Marketing is the art and practice of capturing attention and influencing attitudes and behaviors to sell stuff profitably and sustainably.
Wow. Okay, nailed it.
And by the
That's
way,
great.
like I should do that in fewer words, but marketing is really the art and practice of selling stuff.
That's great. And you know, somebody asked me this question yesterday on a webinar about, is sales and marketing the same thing? This was a B2B specific discussion. I wonder what you think about that, given the definition you just gave me about, you know, marketing
I
and
think
how it impacts sales.
when I say marketing, I always use it as a proxy for sales. I think, however, that the marketing function and the sales function are a Venn diagram and not necessarily the same thing, though they should be united in the same end, and too often are not. When they are not united, or when they are distinct, say, then I would articulate that marketing's job is to facilitate the sale. But, you know, in today's world where everyone is within an enterprise, and oftentimes customers and consumers are representing the brand in some fashion, right? Or representing the brand's narrative. Dear Airline X, somebody posts on Threads, you suck, my flight was 3 hours delayed. That's marketing. Didn't pay for it, don't like it, but it's marketing. The salesperson, like every other employee, even in the biggest companies in the world, is part of the marketing team, whether they like it or not. And that decentralization of the control of brand and narrative is amongst the most fundamental challenges today's CMO faces.
Well, thank you so much, Seth. It was a pleasure to have you here. I definitely learned a lot. Well, there you go, folks. That was Seth Matlins, the Managing Director of the Forbes CMO Network. We'll have many more fun conversations, so tune in again next week. See you.